Journey IFC strives to create safe spaces to worship God. Know that you are welcome just as you are, regardless of religious background or lack thereof, skin color, political affiliation, sexuality, age, culture, or any other label you own or society throws on you. You are welcomed and celebrated here just as you are.
So the story of Esther takes place around 483 BCE. So just so you can get it in your mind as to where we are in history, it's been 100 years since Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, conquered Jerusalem. And there is no more Israel. There are no more 12 tribes. They've been scattered to the four winds. And time has advanced, and the Babylonians themselves have been conquered by the Persians. Okay, so this is where we are. Persians are ruling, and it's going to be another 150 years before Alexander the Great sweeps the world. Okay? The Persian king, King Xerxes, has been on the throne in Susa about 3 years. Now, his Hebrew name is Achashverosh.
Bless you.
Bless you right back. And your Bible, if you're reading Esther in the Bible, it may say his Hebrew name, or it may say Xerxes. It just depends on the translation here. Same guy, either way. Esther is one of only 2 books in the Bible where the name of God is not mentioned at all. The only other book in the Bible is Song of Solomon, which is erotic poetry. And so Esther is the other one. The other thing that's interesting about Esther is it is the only book in the Hebrew Bible, which Christians often call the Old Testament, where not even a little scrap was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So giving an indication that it was a later book, and probably the Essenes, whose community that was, didn't think it was quite holy enough to make it into the canon. And you can kind of see their point. The story of Esther is a Disney sort of story. And it's highly stylized. The characters are either shining paragons of virtue, or are easily manipulated pawns, or are villainous men of power. In fact, the story reminds me very much of the Disney princess stories, where the stories seem on the surface to be made for children with easy-to-follow characters. You know who the good guy, you know the bad guy. But there's constant double entendres, sexual innuendos, and complex cultural references for the adults in the room. No wonder the story is a smash hit. And if that isn't enough to convince you that this is not a strictly historical accounting of events, the whole book is constructed as an elaborate chiasm. Chi is the Greek letter that looks like an X. And a chiasm is an X-shaped sort of story. It's a popular technique used by ancient writers to draw the attention of the audience to the most important part of the story, the central crux. For those folks interested in this geeky sort of Bible thing, I just couldn't pass it up, right? So at the top of each slide, there's a banner heading as we go along that says A, B, C, that'll tell you each stage in the chiasm, and as we back out, it'll say E prime, D prime, C prime, B prime, A prime, as we back out of the crux. But that's not the point of the story. I just want to simply tell you the story. So I just put it in the banners. The story opens with King Xerxes giving a banquet for all the leaders and officials and nobles from his entire kingdom for 6 full months.
Wow.
King Xerxes displays all his lavish wealth and makes it clear to everyone what a splendiferous king he is. At the end of 6 months, the king throws a grand finale banquet that lasts for 7 days. He invites everyone from the entire city of Susa to this banquet. The wealth on display is staggering. Cloth of expensive indigo and scarlet, seats of gold and silver set on intricate mosaic floors of precious jewels. There's even an open bar where every single goblet is unique and made of gold. Wow. It's incredible. So, of course, by the 7th day of this banquet, everyone is roaringly drunk. And King Xerxes orders his eunuchs to fetch Queen Vashti from the harem, wearing her royal crown so he can show her off to everyone. This is the ultimate objectification of a woman, right? Mm-hmm. She is nothing more than a prized possession. And Queen Vashti refuses to come. Perhaps the danger to her in that room of drunk men outweighed whatever punishment King Xerxes might mete out, right? Whatever the reason, she refuses to be objectified. She claims her own agency, come what may. Well, when the eunuchs come back and report the queen's refusal to King Xerxes, he is enraged. He has been publicly humiliated by a woman. He consults with his advisors and asks, what can legally be done to the queen? Because he's really drunk still. They respond that because of her conduct, all women in the whole kingdom will despise and disrespect and disobey their husbands, and there will be no end of contempt and wrath. It reminds me of that Ghostbusters line, you know, dogs and cats sleeping together, you know? It's a typical patriarchal response when control over the women is slipping. Therefore, they say, the king should decree that Vashti may no longer enter his presence. She will be banished and deposed, and someone else will take her place. Well, that sounds like an excellent plan to the drunken king. And he issues a decree throughout his kingdom that all wives shall give honor to their husbands, and every man shall rule his household, by golly. Well, once Queen Vashti has been deposed, it becomes obvious fairly quickly that a new queen needs to be crowned. And apparently, none of the wives and concubines on hand are up to snuff. The king's personal attendants suggest that the most beautiful virgins in the kingdom be rounded up and placed in the harem and given beauty treatments under the supervision of Haggai the eunuch. The virgin who pleases the king the most will become queen. It's at this point that Mordecai is introduced. Now, Mordecai is the guardian of his orphaned cousin, Esther, and she happens to be one of those beautiful virgins who is rounded up. But before she leaves, Uncle Mordecai tells Esther to be careful not to reveal that she is a Jew. Exiles, especially those who do not worship the local deities, are not always entirely welcome in Susa. Well, Esther apparently makes the first cut, because when she arrives, she's taken into the harem by the eunuch Haggai. And she makes the next cut too, because she's singled out by Haggai as being especially promising material, and is given 7 women to attend to her. And all 8 of them are moved to the best place in the harem. Now, no one ever says this, but I honestly don't think those 7 young women are maidservants meant to cater to Esther's every whim. I think these are the 7 girls most pleasing to King Xerxes already. and they are meant to teach Esther about sex and how to please the king. I can't see any other reasonable explanation for their presence or for the privacy afforded them. Uncle Mordecai paces up and down in front of the women's court every day, seeking news of Esther. This goes on for an entire year. Finally, the time comes for Esther to spend the night pleasuring the king. This would normally be a one-night stand. Afterwards, no longer a virgin, obviously, she will go to the concubines portion of the harem and will likely never see the king or another man again unless the king asks for her by name. So this is a night with her whole life hanging in the balance. The rules are that each virgin can take anything she wishes with her that evening. And when it is Esther's turn, she asks the eunuch Hegai what she should take with her. And she takes whatever it is that he suggests. I can't even imagine what that might have been, nor how terrified Esther must be. Nevertheless, Esther has learned her lessons well, and she pleases the king more than any of the other virgins, and he makes her queen. And Esther, the story goes, finds favor in the eyes of everyone, which surely clues you in that this is a story and not actual history, as I cannot imagine any other human organization, much less a harem, where an outsider wins the top spot and is subsequently loved by all. Nope. The virgins are assembled a second time. Now, there's no explanation as to whether this is a second beauty pageant or whether these are however many are left of the original cohort, nor even why they might be assembled, except to provide a frame for what happens next. You see, while they are assembled, Uncle Mordecai is hovering outside the court trying to glean some news of Esther. And while he's there, he overhears two officers plotting the king's assassination. He gets word to Esther. Esther reports it to the king, giving Mordecai credit. Now, if you're familiar with this story already, notice that here, Esther is perfectly capable of getting a complicated message to the king without any royal scepters or any personal danger. She supposedly isn't able to do that later in the story. So this is another hint that this narrative has been massaged to fit the author's purposes. Well, the assassination plot is thwarted and the two officers are impaled, and the whole episode is duly recorded in the annals of the king. At this point, a man named Haman, an Amalekite, is promoted to be second in command to the king. The characterization of Haman as an Amalekite has deep significance. It was the Amalekites who attacked the stragglers, the elderly, and the young, and anybody who was weak, and at the end of the column as the slaves left Egypt in the Exodus, hundreds of years ago. So right away, everyone listening to this story knows that Haman is the bad guy because he's an Amalekite. You see? Haman is the villain. They know this. Get with the program. But Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, Mordecai is from the same tribe and even the same family line as the first king of Israel, King Saul. Remember a couple of weeks ago when we did the Witch of Endor and how God rejected King Saul and Saul was running around trying to figure out what was going to happen to him? Well, God had rejected Saul over some things having to do with the Amalekites. So there's a lot of history between the tribe of Benjamin and the Amalekites. Will Mordecai and Esther be given a chance to redeem their ancestral line? Or will Haman, the Amalekite, prevail? Dun, dun, dun. That's right. King Xerxes decrees that everyone must kneel and give honor to Haman. But Mordecai will not do it. At first, the king's servants try to get Mordecai to cooperate. But Mordecai tells them that he is a Jew, so he cannot bow down to Haman. The servants report this to Haman, and the next time Haman passes Mordecai, he notices that Mordecai is not bowing down to him, and he is enraged. And so Haman plots to kill not only Mordecai, but all the Jews as well. Haman goes to the king and offers him a gigantic bribe to allow Haman to slaughter Jews throughout the kingdom. But the king is like, gives Haman his signet ring, his literal sign of authority, tells him keep the money, do whatever he wishes. And so Haman sends decrees by courier to every corner of the kingdom, proclaiming that all Jews, young and old, men, women, and children, are to be killed, annihilated, on the 13th day of Adar. You should be asking me, how did Haman come up with that specific date? Well, how did that happen? Well, he cast lots, which is like sort of like rolling dice. The Hebrew word is Purim. It's on this date that the lot fell, which is pretty interesting because elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, lots are used to determine the will of God. It is as if behind the scenes of this story, God selects this particular day for a reckoning. And somehow, I don't think the reckoning is going to be what Haman thinks it's going to be. What is also interesting is that Haman sends the orders nearly a year in advance of the chosen date. Adar is the 12th month. But Haman sends the orders on the 13th of Nisan, the first month, 11 months in advance. And the day he sends the decree out is the day before Passover begins. So the Jews receive this horrible message as they begin Passover. But to them must feel like their last Passover. Well, once all this hard work of issuing dastardly decrees is done, the king and Haman drink it up, while the city of Susa is completely bewildered by the orders they've just received. Orders that 11 months from now, they're to rise up and kill every one of their Jewish neighbors, man, woman, and child. Mordecai, of course, tears his clothes, dons sackcloth and ashes, weeping and wailing bitterly, as are all the Jews throughout the land. When Esther hears of Uncle Mordecai's distress, she is very upset and sends one of the eunuchs to give him new clothes and find out what has happened. But Uncle Mordecai refuses the clothing and gives the eunuch a copy of Haman's decree and tells him to ask Esther to go before the king and plead for the lives of her people. Now, Esther has been queen about 5 years at this point, and it's been about a month since she was last called into the king's presence. So she sends a message back to Uncle Mordecai saying, everyone knows that anyone coming into the presence of the king unbidden is subject to death unless the king extends his scepter. And here we reach the center of the chiasm, the core of the story, the main message. Uncle Mordecai responds, do you think that just because you are queen, you will escape the fate of every other Jew? If you remain silent, rescue will come from elsewhere. If you do not intervene, the Jews will be rescued some other way, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows? Perhaps you have been placed in your royal position for such a time as this. This is by far the most famous passage in the whole book. It's quoted all the time, and it speaks to us still today. Who knows? Perhaps you have been placed exactly where you are for such a time as this. It is so cool to find this, literally in the center of the chiasm. Bible Geek, jumps up and down. But we instinctively knew this was the center all along, didn't we? So I want to stop here at this critical point in the story and look at it from underneath. This is part of our She Persists series, and I want to look at this story from the point of view of the women. We don't have time to do all of them, so I want to focus on Queen Vashti and Queen Esther. In this story, both of these women have agency. They have choices. They have a certain amount of power, even if it has to be indirectly applied. What is often overlooked, however, is that the women in this story are being groomed. Esther is quite literally being sexually groomed. And there are people in our very lives who have experienced this and know what this sort of grooming does to a person's core identity. I think of grooming as being different than training. Training would be like a stake next to a young plant, right? Something to help it as it grows, to help it come into its fullest self. But grooming is done to mold us into someone else's idea of who we should be. Grooming robs us of our identities. And there are lots and lots of different kinds of grooming. It doesn't have to be sexual, but it is often associated with an intimate relationship. We can be groomed from birth by our parents to take on a certain persona, a certain career path, certain social status. We can be groomed by a respected teacher to follow a certain way of thinking. This happens all the time in churches and seminaries and other religious institutions, for example. We're groomed to be right and not go wrong in whatever that teacher or group defines that term. We can be groomed by a spouse or a partner to fit their expectations of who we should be, of who we must be to stay in relationship with them. And grooming is insidious. It happens to us without our even being aware of it. It happens without our informed consent. And often, by the time we realize that this image of who we must be is not at all who we actually are, by that time it seems too late. We feel trapped. And that is exactly where Queen Vashti and Queen Esther find themselves. Queen Vashti knew she was taking her life in her hands when she stood up to the king and refused to be who she insisted she should be. And she was stomped on. As far as we know, she was not killed, but she lost everything. She lost her status, her home, her belongings, everything. And she became an outcast because she stood up for herself, because she told her truth. Hear me now. Acknowledging and claiming your truth, who you actually are, has to become more important than anything else in your life. If it does not, you have actually lost your life already, right? Your life is no longer yours. At some point in our lives, the pain of conforming to the image someone has groomed us for will become too great to bear. At some point in our lives, we must reveal ourselves for who we really are, no matter what the consequences. Like Queen Vashti, perhaps we will lose all or even risk death. But if we continue trying to conform to someone else's image of us, we will surely die in more profound ways, through drugs, alcohol, mental breaking, you name it. And that is the message that Mordecai speaks to Esther. He tells her, up to now, it's been prudent to conceal the fact you're a Jew. But the fact remains, you are a Jew. This is your truth, and now is the time to speak it. Do not think you can escape your true identity. You can try to continue to hide, but in doing so, you will betray your people and you will betray your very self. If you do not stand up and speak your truth, your people will be saved some other way. God's got this, but you yourself will perish. And this is true for all of us. If you are someone who is hiding deep inside, with your true self caged and pressed down, so you can conform to someone else's image of you, the story of Esther is a story of liberation. Your truth can be expressed. You have the right to be the person you really are. Can I hear an amen?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Choose to stand up and speak your truth. Choose life. Wasn't that great?
I love her.
I would like to invite Rutanya Mitchner to come up here. Rutanya is a friend of Natalie's, but Rutanya is part of Truth Be Told, which has been a big part of Journey, and I just thought it would be lovely, given the theme today, right? To have you here to talk a little bit about this, because you're a woman who has told your truth.
Many times over. As Dale was speaking about being groomed, it took me back to my upbringing. Both my parents all have history of incarceration. I can remember in my teenage years, young teenage years, 14, 15, when the only time I experienced real affection, parental affection from my parents was when we were in county jail together. The guards arranged for us to be in one room, and my mother shared a candy bar with me. And I don't understand why that was so vivid. I'm still working that out. But it is a very impressionable vision or experience that I had with my parents. And so I've told in my story in the beginning of my youth and being raised that I was groomed to follow in my parents' footsteps, which was, criminal activity and jail and prison and that whole thing. And it wasn't until my mother visited me in one of my last visits to prison that I realized she expected me to continue to get out and continue that lifestyle. It was an expectation. And by that time, I had 4 children, or have 4 children by that time. And I realized that's not the legacy that I wanted to leave for my kids. And so I went back to my cell and I got on my knees. And when my shirt says, long story short, God saved my life, He did. I got on my knees and I told the Lord, I was like, if you are real, I need you to be real now. Like, don't be hanging in the boot. I need you to go, like, let's get this. It's got to be something different. And a couple months later, I was able to, or God put Natalie Sorrell and Carol Wade in my life. founders of Truth Be Told. Telling my story in the prisons or just sharing bits and pieces. It's a 22-year culmination of what you see today, or what you're experiencing at this moment, of being pretty much re-raised or groomed, if you will, with a different narrative, right? Like, I knew what not to do. What to do, I wasn't sure about, right? And to have that modeled and that example modeled daily in front of me and before me was invaluable. The accountability that I didn't have before in my life, invaluable. And anyone that knows Nathalie knows that she goes right to the, okay, that was not what I heard. And so to have that, I'm a product. I am a product of Truth Be Told. I am a prodigal of Truth Be Told. I tell anybody that that has no connection, history, or knowledge of Truth Be Told, that you're looking at it in the flesh. The principles we share with the women in the prison. We just had graduation on Friday, and first graduation since COVID, since the pandemic, and it was phenomenal to hear how the women just open up and freely say, I was this, I did that, but now, I don't know that I would struggle. I would struggle if I was in Esther's shoes. I did struggle. I did struggle telling my truth. And I still to today, depending on the audience, struggle with whether I should share that I was this person. I was a criminal. I had a criminal mind. I had criminal thinking. I really had, where do I say? How much do I say? And I've learned to just live deeper and freer. If you've got a problem with my truth, that's about you. That's not about me. Right? So at the end of the day, I just share. I do my best not to get caught up in that mind talk of what I should and shouldn't share. No, I'm not happy about my past, but what I am happy about is today I get to share about my past. Not only in the prisons, but in my job, in my day-to-day. I get to share and be the light and the hope of what God can do for you if you just let Him. If you just freely give over to His perfect will, and it's not going to be fun, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be some wonderful beauty pageant, it's not going to be any of those things. It's going to be the least, the road, very narrow, very rugged, very windy. But He will light your path if you let Him. And I'm still being groomed, if you will. But the gift in that is watching other women come in their own truth.
Yes.
Watching other women say, oh, wow, that's what that was for. Or, oh, wow. This was done to me, but that's not who I am. Oh, wow. I don't have to go back to drugs. I don't have to steal. I don't have to do those things, and I'm going to be all right. Oh, wow. There is another way. I knew it, but I didn't know how to get there. I get to see that. In those classrooms, in those prisons, I get to see women say, oh, wow, I don't have to do this. And come out and say, where can I go? Who can I tell? This is wonderful. This is great. This is, wow, we need to, and then get on board and get on this train of realization. I'm so honored to be here today. Thank you so much, Dale. I appreciate it, and that's my truth being told.
Thank you, Britannia. And thank you for changing that word grooming to the word transformed. So you all here in the room have really hung in there because the air conditioning is not working today. And I was like, I could not believe y'all didn't just like,
Loving God.
loving God, here I pray. Amen. Heal that air conditioner. We only got to the middle part of the story, right?
Yes.
The main point. So we're gonna like whiz right through the end of it. I'm just gonna back you right out of that story because I want you to know how God shows up in the end. In the end, Esther agrees to go into the king's presence unbidden. She says, "If I perish, I perish." Mordecai and the Jews fast and pray, but this time the twist is they do it with hope rather than despair. So as you back out of the chiasm, there's like a twist to the things that happened as you went in. Esther goes to the king, tells him she has a request, and he extends his scepter to her, one of those sexual innuendos, and he promises her up to half his kingdom. Meanwhile, Haman plots to kill Mordecai, and it looks like he just might make that happen. Haman is honored by the king, he's flying high, he's on a roll, but then everything starts to turn against him. The king remembers, like one late night, that Mordecai saved his life once. And he calls Haman in and asks him what to do for someone the king wishes to honor. Now, Haman thinks he's the one that's going to be honored. He reminds me of that song, "You're so vain, you probably think this song is about you," right? This is Haman's theme song. So he makes up all kinds of crazy stuff, like let him wear the king's clothes and put him on the king's horse and have somebody parade him through the streets hollering, "Here's somebody the king honors." And the king thinks this is a great idea, and he tells Haman to do all of that for Mordecai. I'd love to be a fly on the wall, right? Well, Haman's wife and friends realize at that point that Mordecai is somehow being miraculously protected and that he's going to end up destroying Haman. Okay, so they've kind of figured out that Mordecai's going to win this thing. The king tells Esther again that whatever her request is, he will grant it up to half his kingdom. And so finally, Esther reveals that she is a Jew and that Haman has ordered her death. Well, the king is enraged and orders Haman's immediate execution, and Haman is impaled on the very pole he had prepared for Mordecai.
Ooh.
And in the end, Mordecai is given Haman's place beside the king. Mordecai orders that all the Jews may defend themselves on that day defined for their death. The Jews survive, and the day Haman has appointed for reckoning is now celebrated every year as the Feast of Purim, the Feast of Lights.
That's right.
What a story, right? And now it is time for your blessing and sending. I pray that as you go today, you take away in your heart the sure knowledge that God has called you to be you, to speak your truth. I pray that you know for sure that no matter what the cost, stepping out and becoming you as you truly are is worth it all. Go now to tell your story today in such a time as this. Amen.
God's mercy endures forever.
Amen.